When we purchased Grand Travail, it came with a little winch. Probably didn't work good when it was brand new, and it wasn't brand new, so it found itself in the garbage can. And had a dream of making the front nice. Had to wait for several other projects though, but then I finally got to. Recaulking the decks was on the long list of items to do on the boat, so I went ahead and did this front part underneath where the winch platform was going to go, because it was my only opportunity to get to it, and I wanted to make sure there'd be no leaks where we wouldn't be able to get to them later. Started out by bringing some scraps of plywood to the boat and cutting and recutting and fitting and playing and just messing with it until I got a shape that I liked and a fit that I liked. This is trickier than it looks because there are no straight lines on the boat. Finally, I glassed the two front corners together and put a brace across the back so it wouldn't move, and I brought it home and set it up on the workbench, where I put some vertical guides on the corners. And this is the key. The corners of these guides are on the exact corners I want to duplicate. So once the guides were secure, we could get rid of the plywood box and start stacking cypress strips and gluing them. I did a few each day to make it manageable, and just kept going until I was at the top of the stick. And then I had a nice chunk of wood, not plywood. I'm not a fan of plywood. It was very strong, and the cypress is fairly rot resistant. So far so good. I'm happy with this. It was really strong. So back over at the boat, kind of simultaneously and at the same time, I had to move the closed chocks a little further back because they were conflicting with the box. So I just plugged a hole with a chunk of wood and glassed over it, and the back hole we cut, and I epoxied the perimeter of the new hole to make sure water wouldn't get in there and mess it up. But this was fairly straightforward, and so that when I brought the box back, these holes were no longer in the way and the old holes were plugged up. Now with the box back at the boat, there was some belt sanding to do. I needed to kind of put a radius on the bottom of the box because the front of the boat has an arc to it, and I trued up the fit a little bit where the new box hits the bulwarks. And then I cut a new plywood template for the top, a little more accurate than the old one. And right about now, I spent some time scratching my head on how to anchor this thing down, because to me the anchor is like the most important part of the boat. But I had a game plan, so I was ready to start on the fabricating the top. Again, I'm not a fan of plywood on a boat, and I've got buckets of little pieces of wood here, there, and yonder, so I started gluing up wood. I'm making a laminated top. I've used some cypress. I use all kind of different mahoganies and a couple of pieces of teak, and I just kept gluing them up to 13 inches wide because I could run those through my planer, using everything I had. Uses lots of clamps, but and I crisscross each layer 90 degrees to the previous layer, and everything was glued with epoxy, and I ended up with a top that's about 2 inches thick, and it's pretty damn heavy. And I did this in '07, so it's 10 years old, and it's shown no sign of failing whatsoever. This is a view of the front with the anchor pulpit removed, and you can see the scribe lines on the side where I had marked the box before I took it out. Now I set the box back and set the top back, just kind of playing with it and making sure everything is going to fit correctly. And you can see I've cut the holes for the little plastic access doors that go in the side of the box. And in this next picture, you can see where I put weep holes at the bottom, and I've lined them with a piece of PVC, so there's no exposed end grain. The PVC is epoxied in place. This is the structural part of the original anchor pulpit. It's heavy bronze. You can see there's a wedge gap going from front to back. And there's also a space at the back where the old roller used to be. I've filled that roller space with a rigid sheet of fiberglass epoxied into place, and then I brought the top home, flipped it over, and fiberglassed the bottom just for added strength. Now the box is home, getting a good paint job. This will be the last easy time it will be to paint this thing. So the box is back on the boat for good now. It is screwed from the sides and the bottom, and I've attached a fiberglass angle to the two sides to help screw the top down. And on top of the bronze is a tapered hardwood wedge, which will make the seal that gap that you saw earlier. You can see the 3 vertical patches. That's where the screws go through the bulwarks into the box. So after final fitting the top on the boat, I brought it home to apply the teak strips. I actually purchased these strips. This is the first time I've ever purchased any teak. But they're epoxied on, and I used little screws and little washers to hold them in place until the epoxy set. And tried to match the angle of the original deck. So this piece of hardware you're looking at, this is key. This is a cap screw, which is a short bolt with threads all the way to the head, and it goes through 2 plate washers into a coupling nut. I put 4 of these in. 2 of them are covered by the teak strips, and unfortunately I don't have any photos of the bottom, but the coupling nut gives me a female thread underneath. So after the deck was installed, I put 4 all threads screwed up into these coupling nuts, and they go down through the original deck of the boat with big blocks underneath it. So this new top and this winch and this anchor cleat are anchored very well. With the strips on the top complete, I went ahead and did the exterior trim. Left a crack everywhere for the black polysulfide, I think it's called. And I've drilled the holes for the winch, and there's a little lip around the middle part, and that's to fit underneath the existing wooden anchor pulpit to seal it off from water. So back at the boat, we're all cleaned up and ready for a final installation. The top is screwed through the sides, the bulwarks. It's screwed through that angle that's on the top of the new box, and it is, more importantly, it's held down by the 4 stainless all threads that go through the old deck. The trim around the teak fit the bottom of the old teak pulpit. Then I kind of messed around with the cleat a little bit, trying to decide where to put it. Ended up putting it where you see in this photo, and I added 2 open chocks to the top of the old teak top, and put a cleat for the closed chocks, and finished it up, and very happy with the results. We got a good looking setup up front, and it works. And underneath it, that you can't see, is a high pressure pump with a hose, because when we pull up anchor in Louisiana, we pull up a lot of mud, so that lets me hose it off before we get it into the boat. So hope you've enjoyed this little video. Gave me something to do on a very cold morning.